Hey folks, welcome to Last Breath Woodworks. I'm Josh. Now, about a month ago, maybe a month and a half, I was down at my family's hunting land looking for sheds and came across a pile of some maple chunks that I had cut up from tornado damage a couple years ago, and noticed that a few of the pieces had the white fungus on the ends and stuff, so I'm pretty confident that they're full of spalting, so I grabbed a few of them and brought them home, including this one. Now, they were on the top of the pile, not on the ground, so they were drying out pretty good, and I've had it inside since, so it's pretty light, but you can see it's got a lot of crotches here, so we got 1, 2, 3 branches, and then the trunk on each side, kind of a bend to it. So I got a feeling the grain is going to be pretty twisted inside, and I want to cut it down to fit into this mold. So let's dive into this and see what we can make with a piece of firewood. The first thing I had to do was get the bark off of here, and on this piece it almost fell off, but the tree was taken down in, I think, the middle of June when the storm went through. And it's always important to remember that summer cut wood, the bark will usually fall off easier and it'll have more spalting, whereas winter cut, the bark sticks tight because the water and sugars are down in the roots at that time. Then I just used the bowl to kind of mark out where I could get the best use of this piece, and I marked it a little oversized. Now, this piece was way too wonky to try cutting it up on the bandsaw. It just wouldn't be safe, so here I'm just using a Sawzall to cut the ends off and nip it a little bit, and even this got a little sketchy at times. Now I needed a way to put this on the lathe, so I'm just grabbing a Forstner bit and drilling out a little hole to mount one of my sacrificial tenons. I just added some 2-part 5-minute epoxy, stirred it up with a toothpick and spread it around in there good, and stuck that little oak tenon into that hole and waited for it to dry. Once that had cured, I got it on the lathe and started shaping it and sizing it down so that it would fit nice and snug inside that bowl. It took a little while to do this. I kept moving my rest in and moving it around, because as you can see, there's a lot of air space and all those big fat ends sticking off. It was critical that you be careful here so you don't get a big catch and rip the tool out of your hand or send the chunk flying off the lathe. Now once I had the shape where I wanted it, I just kind of used the round cutter to cut off that little nub on the bottom. And a quick test fit, and things are looking good. Now before I could get this in the form and mix it with epoxy, it was important that I clean off all that mold and all excess bark and any of the little punky spots, you know, kind of in by them little knots and crotches. And finally, it's time to put this thing together. Today's secret ingredient, coffee beans. Ah, yes. Spalted latte. Now you can see I've got some Gorilla Tape wrapped around the sides of that form, sticking up a couple inches because I knew this is going to bubble up a lot when I put it in the vacuum chamber. I just kind of topped everything off, got those beans to settle into every little nook and cranny, and then put my little piece of scrap plywood with the holes drilled in it to release the air, and hot glued that to the sides of that tenon. I mixed up some deep pour epoxy, and here I'm just adding some crystal white pigment. Not a lot, because I wanted that epoxy to be somewhat transparent and kind of give the effect of like cream and sugar with those coffee beans. It actually came out looking pretty good. Now with this set in the vacuum chamber, I dumped it on, and you can see there that I used some more of that Gorilla Tape to seal off the edges around that plywood and to kind of hold everything down, because I had sprayed that form with mold release and didn't want the piece floating up in there while it was curing. And after it's bubbled away for, it took about 40 minutes. I cycled it on and off, topped it off as I went, and then once I hit full vacuum, I let it set for another half hour before placing it in the pressure pot for 3 days. After 3 days, I took it out of the pressure pot and was devastated. I mean, heartbroken. Everything had floated up about a ½ inch, so the wood, the beans, everything were lifted, wasted epoxy on the bottom. Half of my beans weren't totally soaked in epoxy on the top. I mean, at this point, I almost felt like just giving up, but I figured, what the heck, might as well put it on the lathe and see if I can salvage something out of it. I mean, I got this much into it now. After collecting my thoughts, I finally got this piece mounted on the lathe and roughed it out, and I didn't film that part of it because all those loose coffee beans that were on the top and shards of sharp epoxy, I mean, they were flying all over the booth like shotgun pellets on opening day of duck season on the edge of a wildlife preserve. And I was really worried that one of them was going to break the camera on my phone. So I just kept whittling away, trying to get rid of all that excess epoxy that was now going to waste. But you can see the wood starting to show through a little bit, and little by little it started looking like something. So I guess I wasn't totally disappointed anymore, but the beans were chipping a little bit. The epoxy didn't break through the shells on them and soak inside like I thought they would, so I had to take really light passes and just kind of keep shaving away at this the tiniest bit at a time, because the beans wanted to chip out inside. Once I had the outside shaped where I wanted it, I carved a nice foot on the bottom and then cut in a recessed tenon so that I could flip it around in the chuck for hollowing. Now, you'll see here I left that tailstock in as long as I could, because with that light spalted maple and the heavy epoxy, this piece was not very balanced at all. In fact, the fastest speed I think I ever reached was 850 RPM. So with that in mind, I kept the speed down and I kept the walls on here fairly thick, because I didn't know how brittle that epoxy and coffee bean section would be, and I didn't want it blowing out. Now once I got almost all the way to the bottom, I was able to cut that centerpiece out, slide the tailstock out, and finish hollowing the inside of this thing out. Finally, it was just a matter of sanding this entire piece inside and out from 80 grit all the way to 320. Then a quick wipe down with isopropyl alcohol to get rid of any of the sanding sludge, which there was a lot of. And then because that spalted wood was so porous, as were the coffee beans, I decided to give this thing a pretty liberal coating of sanding sealer. Now after that sealer had dried for an hour, I just lightly hit it again with 320, then some 4-aught steel wool, and then another wipe down with the alcohol. And finally it was time to give this thing a nice epoxy coat on the outside. So I just applied it with a basting brush and then smoothed it out with my hands. And since this is a quick cure epoxy, it's fairly thick, so it filled any little divots or voids in them beans. And then the next day when it was cured, I just sanded it down from 120 to 800 and gave it a couple coats of lacquer to seal it up and give it a nice shine. Well, folks, it's finally done. Not gonna lie, this one kicked my butt around the block a couple times, a few times. It's not the piece that I envisioned it being, when I started out, but it's still not horrible. I mean, it's still a nice looking piece. What I don't like is the way the beans floated up and created that straight line with the epoxy below it. But with that tint in there, I guess it doesn't look horrible. I mean, it's just not what I wanted. I also should have cut in a little deeper on my outside passes to get rid of those darkening spots in that maple so that more of the spalting showed, which looks like the inside. That's what I wanted on the outside. Beautiful spalting, light colored maple, dark lines, even some beautiful crotch grain going on there. The beans line up with the edge of the wood, which is what I wanted in the outside. So live and learn. I'm never going to work with spalted wood on a turning unless I stabilize it first, because I don't know if the reflection shows it, but even on the inside, it's not a perfectly smooth surface. There's little bitty divots and low spots and stuff because that softer, like punky wood next to the harder wood would not cut smooth even with a scraper or sanding. So, like I said, lessons learned. I mean, go from here and get better next time, right? So, anyway, as usual, I will put up some glamour shots at the end. And as always, thanks for watching. Last Breath Woodworks.